We were invited just to provide some information and create some awareness about vaping. Our concern as a lung health organization and from the public health perspective is for people who are under the age of 25 because your lungs and your brains are still developing into your early 20s. So as a lung health organization, obviously we're concerned about lung issues, but also for developing brains, we're concerned about the impact of some of the chemicals. Our organization, Breathe New Hampshire, is over 100 years old. Our office is in Manchester. We are a nonprofit. We work on issues, obviously, related to lung health. It could be asthma, tobacco use prevention, vaping awareness. We work with adults who have COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. We do some environmental work, air quality issue type of things, and we also work with our elected officials in Concord on different policies. For this presentation, in order for us to visit schools around the state, like schools, we look for grant funding. So these are two of the organizations supporting this. A few years ago, CVS actually became one of the first large retailers to take all tobacco products off their store shelves. As part of that initiative, their Be the First campaign, they're providing funding for different programs around the country for tobacco use prevention and vaping awareness education. So basically, an overview, what is vaping? It's the inhaling and exhaling of aerosol products created by using vaping devices. These products or devices turn nicotine and other chemicals and flavorings into an aerosol. The devices come by a variety of names. They're made by many manufacturers. What do they all have in common? There's a power source, some type of battery. It could be a lithium battery. In disposable e-cigarettes or disposable vapes, the battery is much smaller. Some of the products are like $9.99 for a 2-pack, and then you throw it away after, so that battery is very small. All the devices have some type of atomizer in them. It could look like a coil, or it could look like a straight piece of metal. This is what heats up the liquids. So all the liquids travel over the atomizer. Some of the devices require that you refill them, so the liquids come in bottles. Other devices have pre-filled pods, but they all contain these elements. And again, all of these products can create an aerosol, not a water vapor. E-cigarettes have changed a lot over time. The first products were created in 2003 in China. There was a pharmacist who was trying to help his father quit smoking. So what that gentleman did is he created a device. It looked just like a cigarette. It had nicotine cartridges. There were no flavored products back then. So he was gradually going to reduce the amount of nicotine that his father used, with the hopes of eventually creating a product where he would be nicotine-free. So keep in mind, the first generation of these products were created to help adults quit smoking. Moving forward, a few years later, you have the items that are in the center, the larger items or the larger devices. They're called tanks or mods. A very big battery, lithium battery. These devices became refillable, and this is when the flavors started to be introduced. These systems were pretty price prohibitive initially, anywhere from $65 to over $300, depending on the type of battery and the metal that they were made out of. And more recently, we've gone totally away from anything that looked like a cigarette to devices that are marketed as being more discreet and able to use anywhere, and those are the devices on the far right. The examples in this image are Soren and JUUL. And again, nothing that looks like a cigarette, which is what the product started out to be. It started to be marketed to adults when it first came out. There are some common myths and facts associated with vaping and the use of vape devices. One of the myths is it's just flavoring, that there are no other chemicals involved in the process or in the products. Another myth is because I vape, it doesn't mean that I'm ever going to smoke cigarettes, and we'll explain why this has changed over time with the use of the products. So true or false, vaping produces an aerosol. After studying the devices and the chemicals involved, we now know this is true. You can't take anywhere from 6 to 60 chemicals, heat them up, and create a water vapor only. Adding the flavor is also a chemical additive. So this is why it's an aerosol. The other thing that happens in the process of vaping, as the liquids travel over that metal atomizer, the heating coil, at times, as the device is used more often, the finish can wear off the coil. So just like a car engine or just like a lawnmower, as parts wear out, some of those fine metal particles from the finish get into the liquid, and it can potentially be inhaled by the user. So in general, mixing the chemicals creates the aerosol, but the other thing that can potentially be added is fine metal particles from the device itself. Another concern as far as the aerosol is secondhand aerosol. Similar to secondhand smoke from cigarettes, secondhand aerosol is actually a thing that hits the environment, especially with larger devices that have a larger plume of aerosol. You've seen the variety of sizes, the images that we showed you. Some of these tank systems create a very large volume of aerosol, which is then inhaled and exhaled by the user. If you're in a confined space like a car and vaping consistently or vaping quite often, you can actually create kind of a cloudy film on the windshield of a car. The base of these products, all these chemicals, nicotine is an oily substance. When you look at the vape liquids or the flavor pods, it's an amber or a gold-colored liquid. It's very heavy. It's oil-based. So in that aerosol, it also creates kind of a sticky substance. So that's what adheres to the windows of a car and potentially can adhere to the dashboard, again, depending on the size of the device and the frequency of use. The other concern is if someone is in the car that's not vaping, similar to cigarette use, if the person is susceptible to respiratory issues like asthma or COPD, it can create a reaction for that person by inhaling the aerosol. From a public health standpoint, the big concern, and we've seen it in the news more recently, is this is not a fully regulated industry in this country. Other countries that have sold vaping devices have stricter regulations. For example, Canada, some of the compounds they allow to be sold are much lower in nicotine level. Same thing happens in England. Here in the US, we're still catching up with the regulations, so it's a pretty unregulated industry, which again, there's some safety issues with that. Right now, there's over 450 types of devices on the market in the US and over 15,000 flavors. So again, it's very difficult to monitor the outcomes of all of these products, and it's different user to user. In the US, there's a lot of common everyday items that go through a regulatory process before we're able to consume or purchase them. Grocery store items, over-the-counter medications, prescription drugs, even things like cosmetics are tested before they're put on the market. Even with all that testing and all the precautionary work done, sometimes you hear about recalls of food items or cosmetics or prescriptions. Well, keep in mind that the vaping devices and the e-liquids and pods that are out there are not fully regulated. So lately we've seen an increase in some lung health issues. It's very difficult for the FDA, for the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, to track down the source of some of these concerns. From our perspective, too, another concern is for the 5th straight year, use of vape products is the highest use of tobacco products across the US by high school students. So we've seen dramatic declines in the use of cigarettes and some other traditional tobacco products, but we've seen a very dramatic and sharp increase and a continued increase in the use of vaping products across the country by people in high school and middle school. Just a couple weeks ago, there were new statistics released for 2019, and again, the concerning factor is this number has now gone up. So 27.5% of high school students are using e-cigarettes on a somewhat regular basis. Again, we've gone way down with cigarette use and other tobacco products use, but e-cigarettes is still continuing to rise. E-cigarettes are considered at the federal and the state level as a tobacco product, so the same age restrictions for sales apply to these products that apply for cigarettes. One of the things that's come up that's pretty consistent for both 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, and when asked what they think is in the liquids or in the flavor pods, most people think it is just flavoring. They don't associate that there's any other chemicals in there. Something to keep in mind is flavors cover the harshness of the chemicals. Currently in the U.S., there's only 2 types of cigarettes or 2 flavors of cigarettes sold, menthol or regular tobacco. The reason being that in the 1990s, they found out that if flavored cigarettes were allowed to be marketed by tobacco companies, they appealed to people of all ages, not just adults. So years ago, there was a law that prohibited the sale of any other flavored of tobacco products other than menthol. That does not apply to the vaping products. As we said, there's thousands of flavors available, makes the product available, makes the product appealing to a wide variety of ages. You've gone away from the target audience of adults trying to quit smoking. What do we know about nicotine? Well, we know it's a very addictive, powerful substance. The nicotine in the vape liquids and pods is the same nicotine that's in cigarettes. It comes from the tobacco plant. It is still much more cost-effective for these companies to get the nicotine from a plant than it is to make it synthetically. So the same nicotine is in the pods and in the flavored liquids that's in cigarettes. Our concern, again, we said our brains are still developing into our early 20s. Nicotine, like alcohol, cocaine, and heroin, directly affects the reward system of the brain. It creates an immediate reaction. It triggers the brain. That's why it's a difficult thing to give up, and that's why there is potential for addiction. It also is why you see some people that have smoked for years that are now on oxygen because of chronic health issues. They find it very difficult to give up cigarettes, and they're still smoking even though they may be on oxygen 24 hours a day. Those folks have an addiction to nicotine. They just can't break that cycle. So again, these substances trigger the reward center of your brain, which releases adrenaline or dopamine, which are good things when the trigger happens naturally. Introducing these substances create the false reaction in your brain, potentially allowing people to want to create that feeling more often so they continue to use a substance. The other concern with the developing brain is our brains develop from back to front. So the front part of your brain is where learning takes place, decision-making, your attention, mood and impulse control. So those are critical areas of the brain that are still developing, and if you introduce substances at a younger age, it's more apt to have an instant impact and also be more difficult to break that cycle. With different types of nicotine products, such as a cigarette, upon inhaling from a cigarette, the user of the cigarette delivers nicotine to the brain in as little as 7 seconds. So because it's such a quick delivery system of a substance to the brain, that's why smoking is still such a hard thing to break. It's the delivery mechanism and how quick it hits the brain and creates that reaction and chemical exchange in your brain. Another myth with the products is I don't have an addictive personality, so I'm not going to get hooked. A lot of people don't start out with the intention of getting hooked on any substance in particular. Cigarettes are a more common thing. They're also legal to purchase or legally sold at a certain age, so they are more available than some of the other substances we mentioned. Vaping delivers the nicotine, again, in such a short number or span of time to your brain and gets that reaction. That's why people get hooked on it. Again, you're more susceptible as your brain's developing, and you're also more susceptible to addiction as your brain's developing. Our concern is your brains aren't easily replaceable, neither are your lungs. And again, the less harm that you can incur to your health and to your body at this point in your life, the much better off you will be moving forward. We mentioned that the effect on the brain can affect your attention and learning, It may be difficult enough to sit through classes 5 days a week. And then if you intend to go on to college, you're going to be sitting in classrooms again. You don't want to start using substances now that affect your ability to retain information and learn. Nicotine and other substances also can alter the brain circuitry. That's why your attention and learning gets impacted. We know from studies, many years of studies of cigarettes and traditional cigarette smoking, how nicotine travels through the body. When somebody inhales from a cigarette, the nicotine passes through the lung membranes into the bloodstream. The bloodstream carries the nicotine throughout the body. We know from studies of cigarettes, long-term health impacts can be things like stroke, heart disease, high blood pressure, different forms of cancer. Those are known results from cigarette smoking. Here in New Hampshire, annually, about 1,900 people die each year from cigarette smoking or complications to their health from cigarette smoking. So we still have a high rate of death and loss of life in New Hampshire and around the country from cigarette smoking, even though there are fewer adults smoking. It's because the long-term health impacts can show up even years after somebody has quit smoking. We don't know right now what the long-term health impacts can be or will be from vaping. We can't predict if somebody vapes for 5 years, how it might impact their health in 10 or 15 years. For example, when we talk about the people who are on oxygen from cigarette smoking, they didn't immediately go on oxygen when they started smoking when they were in their teens or 20s. It took sometimes 10, 15, or 20 years for the health impacts to be severe enough where they needed oxygen on a daily basis. So we can't predict the health impacts for people who are vaping now and continue to vape. Some of the effects of nicotine, both the use of the product and then the withdrawal from it. You can see the alertness, reduced appetite and palpitations, increased blood pressure, which we talked about from cigarettes. Those are the effects of it. And then some of the withdrawal symptoms if somebody has used enough of the product so they are actually addicted to it. Unfortunately, for teens, you get these symptoms much earlier. You may have less severe withdrawal symptoms, but they're going to hit you much earlier because your brain is still developing. If you're in a household or around people who vape or use these devices, just something to be aware of, impact to smaller kids, younger kids, if you have younger siblings or relatives. If a toddler ingests less than half a teaspoon of an e-liquid, it can be fatal. It can kill them. It's again because it's so toxic, and based on their body size, it can be severe enough reaction that it causes the child to pass away. How do toddlers or how do young kids get a hold of these products? Some of the devices are made cheaply, they leak, they come into contact with the stuff that's leaked from the device. We'll show you some examples of packaging of products where young kids are going to mix up e-liquids with something that they see every day in the grocery store. The other thing is if people have refillable devices. When they're refilling devices, whether it's an adult or a younger person, sometimes they spill the liquid on the counter or the table and don't realize it. Another person comes along and touches the liquid and then touches their nose or their eyes or their mouth and transfers the chemicals to their skin. The toxicity in the chemicals can create enough of a reaction so they have skin irritation or need medical treatment. Along with all the flavors comes the fact that animals are attracted to the flavors. So in some cases, household pets are licking spilled liquids up and being poisoned. So again, just something to be aware of if you're around people using these products. Another myth is vapes don't have nicotine. Nicotine isn't bad for me. Well, we discussed why nicotine is bad for many people of all ages. And most of the vape products do contain nicotine. It's not just flavorings. Even the products that have been labeled 0% nicotine, some of those that have been tested have contained trace amounts of nicotine. So again, lack of regulation. Some of the labeling is a problem in this country. The packaging is not accurate. So another note, we talk about JUUL. We're not promoting the product, but it's one of the more commonly sold vape devices in this country. Their products all have nicotine, various amounts of nicotine in their pods. And again, we talked about nicotine can disrupt normal brain development. Some examples of content or amounts of nicotine in some of these products. One JUUL pod has the same amount of nicotine as a pack or more of cigarettes. JUUL pods come in 3% and 5%, so depending on what pod it is, it's equivalent to the amount of nicotine in a pack of cigarettes or more. So if you use a pod a day, you're taking in the amount of nicotine in a pack of cigarettes per day. These are some of the other common pod products out there and the equivalency of nicotine. So you have something, a fixed pod, one of their pods, the amount of nicotine is about 75 cigarettes. Soren pod, the amount of nicotine in one of their pods is equivalent to anywhere from 90 to 150 cigarettes, depending on which pod you purchase. So again, the amount of nicotine is high. Again, the flavors cover the harshness of the chemicals, cover the harshness of the nicotine, so you're not tasting the same things that somebody who smokes cigarettes do. The concern from the public health perspective is occasional use of any of these substances, whether it's nicotine or alcohol or other substances, sometimes leads to more regular use, and for some people it can lead to total dependency, and that becomes an issue for that person. Another myth is that e-cigarettes without nicotine are harmless and just produce water vapor. Well, we've talked a little bit about the chemical process for these devices cannot take place unless you have something in there besides the flavor. You can't get a vape device to work correctly just by putting water in it. So there are other chemicals, even if it's not nicotine. There's also people introducing other substances that may be legal or illegal to vape devices. So no one is sure in some cases what they're buying. People share devices. That's also a concern because you may not know what is being put in the devices for the liquids or for the chemical components. The other important factor, and especially for our organization, not only the health of your brain, but the health of your lungs. Our lungs are our filter for our bodies. Here in the Northeast, we get a lot of stuff in the environment. We're on the prevailing side of the U.S., so the winds come from the West Coast across the country to the East Coast. We also have the temperature swings here in the Northeast, so you have different sources of heating, different times of the year. We're dealing with some manufacturing emissions, power plant emissions. We're also dealing with the traditional emissions from cars, from idling cars. So in addition to all the stuff your body's already trying to filter out at different times of the year, adding something like vaping or using these products, it makes it tough for your system to take care of all of this stuff. And again, keeping in mind that these products are heavy oil-based products. The oil chemical in these devices, in these liquids, adheres to your lungs. Your lungs cannot easily expel this material, and we'll explain how that's related to the recent injuries across the country, acute lung injuries. Just on a daily basis, sitting like you are now, by the end of the day, you've taken as many as 17,000 breaths. That's without running on a sports field or running up and down the stairs. Just sitting still, we take 17,000 breaths a day. We don't think about it. Somebody who's on oxygen or who has respiratory health issues, sometimes for them to take a walk or to go up and down stairs, to go grocery shopping, is a concentrated effort. And they do think about every breath that they take because it's so difficult. As far as what's been in the news recently with lung health, acute lung health injury, Centers for Disease Control is tracking now hospitalizations and investigating any reports from different states as to what has happened with patients admitted with respiratory conditions. Unfortunately, there may have been a lot of misdiagnosed people the last few months because some of the symptoms resemble things like pneumonia or bronchitis or asthma, but now we're finding out that in some cases people are being readmitted to the hospital, and through further investigation, some of these illnesses have been related to vaping. So here in this country, there's been over 2,000 confirmed cases of acute lung injury related to vaping. In the majority of those cases, some other substances were introduced. It was not only nicotine. In some cases, they were using THC, a marijuana derivative, but not all cases use THC. There's also been 39 deaths as a result of these acute lung injuries across the country. Someone as young as 17 has passed away from this. Just this week, there was an individual, a 17-year-old in Michigan, who had a double lung transplant. That's not a very common procedure, very difficult procedure, and it's extremely unusual for somebody that young to have that. He was somebody who used vaping products. They haven't released information as to how long he had been vaping, but he needed a double lung transplant because his lungs were so in such poor shape. They couldn't retain any volume of air at all. So some of the symptoms associated with these acute lung injuries, shortness of breath, coughing, chest pain, could be things like nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, fever, chills. Again, a lot of the symptoms for these acute lung injuries from vaping resemble other things, or resemble the flu. So that's potentially why people get readmitted, and initially it looks like they have something else, or the doctor, or they may not share that they vaped. So it gets misdiagnosed, and when they're admitted again, the acute lung injury has progressed, and the treatment might need to be longer. This is the example of the young person we just mentioned with the double lung transplant. This image on the left is his lungs. You can't really even see the shape. That was before he had the transplant. His lungs were so deficient and in such poor shape that you couldn't even recognize the outline of the lung. Moving forward, this is after the transplant. You can actually see the shape of the lung. So again, a very unusual procedure for somebody that young. So true or false, just flavorings are in e-cigarettes. From what we've discussed, we know that this is false. Again, to get the chemical process to work, when you're heating up these things, you need other chemicals involved, anywhere from 6 to 60 chemicals, depending on the liquid that's purchased. Something also to keep in mind, the different companies that manufacture different pods or different liquids, not everybody has the same amount of nicotine in what they're selling. And again, it may or may not be on the packaging due to lack of regulation. We discussed the different things that can be in the e-cigarettes because of the mixture of the chemicals. And then also keep in mind that as you heat up liquids and heat up these chemical mixtures, you're creating other organic compounds. Once you introduce various levels of heat, that changes the original nature of the chemicals. This is where you get into the possibilities of young children picking up some of these packages or some of the e-liquid bottles. It's made to look like other flavors of products that we all like, whether it's desserts, common everyday food items, Sour Patch candy. So the flavors in the Sour Patch candy, in desserts, in donuts, those are FDA-approved flavors in products that we eat and consume. These same FDA flavors that are added to vape products have not been tested for heating up, mixing with other chemicals. So when a manufacturing company that produces a vape liquid says it's an FDA-approved flavor, it's an FDA-approved flavor if we eat it and consume it and digest it. Nobody knows the outcome when heating it up and mixing it with other chemicals and inhaling it. It hasn't been tested or approved for that. Some of the chemicals found in e-liquids when tested, again, not every e-liquid or pod has this. Propylene glycol is an antifreeze. Formaldehyde is an embalming fluid. Again, nicotine is prevalent in most products. Rubidium is something that creates the purple color in fireworks. Ethylbenzene is a common ingredient in paints and pesticides, and acetone is a nail polish remover. For anybody that's removed nail polish, just the smell of the nail polish remover is very strong. When you go in a salon, a lot of the people that work in salons on a daily basis wear a respiratory cover or a mask to protect themselves. So again, these chemicals individually are not something you would probably want to heat up and inhale. The flavors cover the harshness of these products. These are just some of the other chemicals that are in different liquids. Again, every manufacturing company has its own formula, but these are some of the other chemicals found, things that some cases we can't even pronounce, other things are more common, tin, lead, nickel, zinc. Again, heating up these chemicals and these ingredients changes the process or changes the nature of these chemicals too. So it's very difficult. This is why long-term health impact, due to lack of studies and lack of availability of data, because the products are fairly new, and due to the variety of the products out there, somebody can use a smaller device with a smaller battery with the same liquid, and somebody else has a tank or a mod system with a bigger lithium battery. You can't compare how the people are using them because the temperature is different from device to device, and also the person using it inhales differently and inhales at a different rate per day when they use the device. So it's very hard to predict the outcome for everybody. Getting back to the flavors, you know what you're getting when you buy food products. It's somebody says glazed donut, you go to a bakery or a donut shop, you know what you're getting. You don't necessarily know what you're getting in an e-liquid that's called glazed donut. Again, keeping in mind the flavors are approved for food products, not for heating up. The warning labels on the common and popular products have changed over time. JUUL never used to have a warning label in large print on the front of their box. Now they are acknowledging that their products contain nicotine and nicotine can be addictive. In fine print above the warning label, it also says this is the alternative for adult smokers. So on one hand, some of their ads look like they're targeting younger people, and then on the other hand, they also acknowledge that they want to be marketing toward adults who are trying to quit smoking. Chemical ingredients on the packaging of pods has also changed. Another warning label that's now obvious. They also, on their website, list their ingredients as glycerol, propylene glycol, oils, extracts, flavor, and benzoic acid. Again, that's what's involved in their formula to get their product to work. These are not chemicals you'd necessarily would choose to inhale individually. One of the other concerns with the variety of devices out there is people using vape devices or using special devices for marijuana products, especially THC, which is a psychoactive chemical for marijuana. Mood-altering substance. Unfortunately, over time, the strength and the content and concentration of THC has increased dramatically. It used to be that 10% THC was considered strong. A lot of the products that are being sold are now 40 to 80% in strength. So for people who have never used the product and through vaping it, again, it's a quick delivery to the brain. You're changing and altering your brain chemistry. The other thing to keep in mind with THC is you're operating under the influence of a drug. It's a substance. It is psychoactive. With the process of marijuana wax and dabbing, some of the oils that are left, the residual oils, are very strong and can pose different health risks. The process of using some of these products, it's very flammable. It also, in this case, dabbing can create permanent brain damage and infect your central nervous system, increase your heart rate. Again, when we go back to the Centers for Disease Control, the acute lung injury, the majority of people across the country reported also adding some form of THC to their vape products. So again, there's concern with the use of THC because the levels are not monitored. And again, packaging and regulation of marijuana products. At the federal level, marijuana is still not legal. Even though some states have legalized it, it's not legal at the federal level. Again, the warning labels. This happens to be a company that came out with pre-filled THC pods. How many people read the warning labels? How many adults read the warning labels? A lot of young kids are certainly not going to read warning labels when it comes to e-liquids in the packaging. So just something to be aware of. The possible side effects, too, of marijuana use or the THC, impaired judgment and motor skills. Again, we talked about operating vehicles when using THC or after using THC. Poor concentration, mood swings. Again, it affects your brain directly, and through the process of vaping, it's a very quick interaction with your brain and a quick reaction. As far as the marketing of the products and the flavors, this is where the accidental exposures to young kids come into play. The items with the red box underneath them are actually e-liquids that are made to look like common everyday products. One that looks like Ready Whip. There's an e-liquid that resembles Nilla wafers or Oreo cookies. And then the one on the bottom is the one that's of concern with young kids. The item on the left is an e-liquid that's apple juice flavored. The item on the right is a juicy juice box of apple juice. So again, young kids, and I'm talking younger siblings, they're not going to recognize the difference with this packaging. They're not going to read the labels and see the caution statements or the warnings on the label. These are some of the samples of products that were available in the area of where we work. Again, an adult trying to quit smoking probably does not need an e-liquid that's flavored, that the flavor is candy treats. They're trying to find a way to quit smoking. They're not as concerned about the flavor as they are about quitting smoking. We feel that because of the flavors involved in these products, that is the eye of the storm. That is why they are so popular and so prevalent through the use of by people of all ages. Again, that CDC study, the people that had passed away from vaping ranged in age from 17 to 75. So these products have a very wide range of appeal based on the flavors and the devices that are out there. The ads that have gone out, again, does this look like something that's targeting an adult trying to quit smoking? These are back-to-school ads that came out last year. A lot of these companies are trying to develop customers now at a young age who get hooked on the nicotine, so moving forward, you remain a customer, whether you choose to use a vape product or whether you choose to use a cigarette. They want to create their customer base now. These ads were done, they're very colorful, they appeal to the flavors being sold, and they appeal to the social aspect that's gone along with vaping. That's how it's being marketed. Again, to younger audiences, not to adults trying to quit smoking. What's similar about this ad campaign is in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of cigarette ads that were created using cartoon characters, colorful images, well-known people, models. Again, they were trying to get to the younger audience, not to adult smokers. They were trying to create smokers of the future, or people that would buy their products in the future by actually advertising to people that were under the age of 18. The ad on the left is a cool cigarette ad from the 1990s, and the ad on the right is a JUUL ad from 2016. So they're using even similar images, similar profiles. They didn't have to even go far to create a new image. They just updated it to this generation. To try to offset some of these advertising campaigns that are targeting younger people, the Centers for Disease Control has tried to create awareness campaigns about the use of nicotine and how nicotine products can harm brain development and can potentially lead to addiction. One of the other myths is if I vape, it doesn't mean I'm going to smoke cigarettes. Evidence now suggests that teens who vape are more likely to transition to cigarettes. A lot of young people will say cigarettes smell, I don't like the smell of my clothing, I don't like being around people who smoke. But again, moving forward, it's the introduction to nicotine at a younger age that potentially can get you to move on to cigarette or traditional tobacco products. So the research now shows that you're 3 to 4 times more likely to move on to using cigarettes if you introduce nicotine through vaping in your teens. We do know from many years of cigarette studies that 88% of the adults who were smoking or who did smoke and continued to smoke started before the age of 18. So it's a very high percentage. And again, it gets back to introducing a substance like nicotine at a young age when your brain is still developing. Here in New Hampshire, there are some policies in place in public schools. We have tobacco and drug-free zones. That includes e-cigarettes and tobacco products as well as other substances. This summer, the policy was updated to include no tobacco products for anyone on public school grounds, including vapes, e-liquids, even empty pods or empty liquid bottles. So they got very specific. These tobacco products and vape products have been traditionally not allowed on public school grounds, but now the law is very specific, and even if you have an empty pod, you can have consequences for having that in your possession on public school grounds. Here in New Hampshire, the age for sales for tobacco products, including all the vape products, is going to change in January. It's going to be 19 as of January 1st, so it's going up by 1 year. Across the country, there are now 18 states that have what is known as Tobacco 21 laws. Sales age for tobacco in 18 states is 21. And again, that includes all vape products as well. So what are some of the things that can be done? We want to keep in mind that these products can lead to brain changes. The products are unregulated. The vape industry is using similar tactics that tobacco companies used, and we don't know long-term health impacts. Speak with parents or educators here at school, different staff in the guidance department, the school nurse, SROs. There are people that want to help you and help you get the right information. Some other resources that are out there, the Truth Initiative works with young adults and teens. They're a national organization. Smoke Free Teen is a Department of Health and Human Services website, the Real Cost campaign. And then here in New Hampshire, as of last month, there is a new program specifically for young people under the age of 18. My Life, My Quit is a program where you can either text or talk to somebody live. It's confidential at no cost. They will coach you through the process of trying to stop using nicotine products, whether it be cigarettes or vape products. And they will also guide you to other resources that are available. So My Life, My Quit is a new program here in New Hampshire. It's an offshoot of the Quit Now program, which is for adults. This is the original Quit Now program that was for people 18 and older. So just some of the key points to keep in mind. Nicotine's addictive, whether it's in a cigarette, cigar, snuff, chew, dip, snooze, dissolvable products, or in vape products. Nicotine is addictive. It's illegal for anyone under 18 in New Hampshire. Will be 19 in January. We don't know the long-term health impacts. These products, vape products, were originally being marketed as being safer than cigarettes. From our perspective, we would have said potentially less harmful. Now we're not sure because of all the acute lung injuries we're seeing. We definitely are seeing short-term health impacts. There have actually been young people across the country that were addicted enough that they are in adolescent addiction programs to try to quit nicotine. It's very difficult to help somebody at a young age, under the age of 25, that's using nicotine, can't use some of the same methods that you would use to help adults quit smoking or quit using nicotine products. So I appreciate your time. We're going to try to take some questions. Again, this was just to give you some information at the school's invitation. So thank you.